Sunglasses.
Yeah.
Don't rifle through it. Yeah. You know, I went to your,
No, he'll still be here. That's true. You two would be close together, so I just get to set up. That's true for you.
still that.
There's no one close to our here, so.
It's changing.
But I'm sure. Family first community center. Hey, why don't you just talk and run back?
So have the, yeah.
Yeah.
You're here with
Not that I'm gonna.
Ryan McGurvin from the city of Brentwood. Sean Kelly from Maple Valley. All right, so I'm gonna put you on speaker here. Okay.
Close to that kind of weird
Is that all right?
island.
Yeah, this is great. Great. All right, so Ryan and I'm sorry, Sean, the topic is your favorite housing development.
Yeah, fortress feeling.
Yeah, and it was also.
I have not. It's your virtual, I can jump in. So I am going to one that's coming up with only because it was quite the effort. The Sunset Terrace, the mixed use project is it was done with. It's a 50-50 affordable. Great split.
People were like,
Actually,
it's email, so.
when they plan, we wanted to make sure we had things get more we were involved with picked up a project originally was gonna be like a water project and what's that got it to now should be nearing I don't remember the date finish date was, but very exciting, just based purely on the number of units.
One that we just went and toured recently that
I'm gonna look it up while someone else goes.
Okay, that'd be great.
Eric, Sean Kelly, Maple Valley. Talk about Monarch apartment complex we have.
like Washington Partners,
Years
yeah,
ago.
across the street.
It's really specified. It's a really nice location.
Yeah.
To get the vibrancy of retail.
I know, it's a candid or it's
You know,
Can't even tell.
I know, it's in a very
Hello.
fortunate place that.
So,
Don't really know. Yeah, I think I, appreciated that.
Probably.
Yeah.
Wow, community roots housing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because it's that EDA thing that Seattle set up, and so you gotta do it. Document that. That a lot of
Next door.
councils have that probably.
I like that one too. But actually,
What's your favorite housing development and why?
Similar, 190, so it's 50-50. It's a big one. I was thinking like it's big chunk.
The old,
Yeah.
old Target.
Eric, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, she came in.
That's our struggle.
You know, if you actually own it.
It isn't, so I just, is it first piece of data or just this?
They share. Yeah, and you've got 6 minutes left.
Town.
Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of the housing developments.
How's your favorite housing
What's the one for the reason?
I aspire that
opportunities to share exciting projects like what we have. One of the projects that I watched over the years on was the Highline.
Sorry, so I'm like,
High Point development in Seattle, West Seattle, and
but yeah,
online. It's really interesting. And mix of housing types and housing units. And there are a number of times just to take a look and see how Seattle did it. But I always thought that was a really interesting project. I know that as they did, they had a lot of
We were talking about how
intentional affordable housing
here
blended in, but the other ones were solar parks.
concentrated
So
cluster.
the pipeline
low-income housing
is always
development
been just a fascinating example of Seattle having a
Then
contemporary
is the
that.
concentrated for services and not just
Different.
And, you know, I think what they're moving
All right, we got a moment.
towards, it moves into a different discussion, and this one says transition to supplement.
I can't remember if we had that. It's an affordable homeownership option. Through
Here is
so it does provide people with access
the
to.
drugs.
often and
So that was
complaining about it, but it's because we already have a lot.
a lot less.
There's already.
That I know.
you know,
And without boundaries. Look at our- And it's my guess is for sure. You look at our housing inventory. We have
Should just go.
and then 0 to 30 and 80 and above is almost non-existent. So we're good at that 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. But just say that out loud. That's the goal. It's not real. Oh,
That was
it's real.
and you're right.
So.
It's very dry.
Favorite housing development?
Favorite, so two kind of my mind that
So
has.
the idea of a community land is not very
Not just,
common. I know it's much sort of.
they've wanted to stack housing around.
Really, we're really trying to future housing.
That you need more than just
Yeah.
housing.
Nice, bro.
Put a whole bunch of people.
Not very.
in-
So really excited about this.
All right, I'm gonna turn you off and we'll go back to Zoom and then we'll come back later.
Yeah,
All right, thank you, sir.
So that's really exciting to see.
Do you really want to
Yeah,
go?
I think the other one is when
I got
were,
to have an ad.
Not 6
um,
Got an
to
18-month
get
old.
to the service.
You'll
they
kind of
want.
more like the weeds of like the writing the grants and managing projects. And it's just like early on.
Yeah,
it's
that's
interesting
exactly what
to
we
look
do,
at,
but, you know, because they stop. at-
Taking an old
Yeah.
They don't stop.
building.
How long have you been looking
Really stops here. Nice to have these homes.
Yeah.
And-
And.
So really, I just don't, and I don't, that's how.
So we, I mean, I was, like I said, I wrote the grant, I did all of the questions and did the design to 6 people. So I'm really filling.
It's nice to be able to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, so
Like,
beginning to end, it's like the first people walk in.
Yeah, that was. Everyone got one. Together.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute left,
Yeah.
so let's.
Yeah, it's honest, you don't always, it's like a 20-year
When
job
did-
development kind of thing.
1 minute left.
Yeah.
that's how I feel about library. Planning.
All right, right.
For me,
Plan and people talking about.
Yeah.
Hi, it's now and. Yeah. Here, I'm.
Yeah, we have 4 of our 7 positions up and nobody. filled it.
Makes you do.
I think we all should stop.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, I wrote another exciting. I have correspondence, so. We've been in the line for 6 years, probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gonna need parking like this.
Yeah.
Everything else going down there.
All right. Yeah.
You know, for people.
Yeah, that's like our plans. That was.
But unless people are from the other end of the train, not like you have to. Yeah. That's another difference between downtown Seattle.
I just didn't.
All right, and that's time.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
All right.
We stay here.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
that, yeah.
And for a bike.
This year, I brought my stuff on that.
Yeah.
I gotta work on my gains on the bike.
All right, so. Does anyone want to share one? Anyone want to, dying to share with the group? If,
Picture.
So I'll start in Auburn. I'm not gonna get points for the affordable housing piece of it. But it's directly across the street, the Trek Apartments, because that was the catalyst for redeveloping and having density in our downtown. That one started about 10 years ago. Broke ground right around 10 years ago. And since then, Merrill Gardens for seniors, Legacy, and I'm gonna forget the other one that's at the end. But that has brought about 500 doors downtown. And another 50 will be open just later this month. So it's just really exciting that that was the catalyst for bringing the density that we had desired to our downtown core.
super, thanks for sharing. And very apropos, since you are all here, we can physically see that, it's right there out the window, so thanks for that. Well, let's jump into our business, if you don't mind. So Housing Capital Fund guidelines. So this item was brought forward to you last month, and I wanted to bring it back for further review with some revised language to go over. And before we jump into the revised draft, I wanted to refresh your memory on why we're even talking about this. And so the development and adoption of the Housing Capital Fund guidelines is an annual process, which you began last year with the creation of the SKIP Housing Capital Fund, and completed your first round of project selections in December. And we're currently working on contracts for those projects. So the second interlocal agreement that those cities that are contributing to the Housing Capital Fund that are parties to states that, and you can see it on the slide, that the SKIP, that for each round of funding applications for which SKIP intends to use funds pooled under the agreement, the SKIP board will identify funding guidelines that will include but not be limited to the amount of available funding, household income target, funding priorities, eligible activities in geographic areas, and more. So the board must adopt these guidelines every year. So I heard from the board last meeting a desire for the project location jurisdiction to be able to weigh in on a project application before the end of this process and to formalize that option in the guidelines. And when I say project location jurisdiction, I mean the city that is hosting this project application. So Burien, for example, last year would be the project location jurisdiction. And before we look at the revised language, I want to look at the current project application process. So you're familiar with that as we move into adjusting that process. So we plan to release the guidelines July 24th, which serves as our notice of funding available. And an optional notice of intent to apply by the applicant are due August 7th. Pre-application meetings are required before the September 15th deadlines. And these pre-application meetings include the jurisdiction from the project location and with SKIP staff. So these meetings are held to address any issues early on in the process for the applicant. And ideally, there would be lots of communication back and forth with SKIP and the applicant. So once a project is ready to apply, they submit an application plus an addendum, and you can see on the slide, and a letter of consistency, which is a standard letter from the city that just says, yeah, this project is in line with our comprehensive plan. And it's something that these developers are very accustomed to receiving. It's a pretty administrative item. And then they're also required to provide a letter of community support. So that's the current process for an applicant applying for SKIP funds. So So the question is, well, when does the city weigh in? So we'll talk about the revised language now. So I heard from the board last meeting an interest in ensuring that the city where the project would occur was aware of the application and provide an opportunity to weigh in early in the process, not later in the process, not after things have kind of been said and done. And I sent you revised language for your consideration Friday, June 9th at 7:49 p.m. And that is actually also part of your packets as well. So you should have that in front of you and track changes. And so don't worry if you haven't had chance to review that. We're going to go over that proposed language now. And so the revised language is on the slide, and I'll just read it to you. This is new language in the pre-application meeting part of the document. So city staff from the project location jurisdiction shall notify the respective SKHHP Executive Board member and administration of the applicant's intent to apply and may consult with their legislative body on the project proposal. Within 2 weeks of such notification, a statement may be submitted on the project proposal to SKHHP staff as part of the project's Housing Capital Fund application. So this is when the jurisdiction's staff is invited to the meeting for the pre-application. So this is an added component to that. And so the goals of this revised language really are to provide flexibility for each jurisdiction to determine if they want to comment on the project or not when located in their jurisdiction. And since SKHHP is made up of 11 jurisdictions with unique preferences, having this flexibility to determine how you approach these projects when located in your jurisdiction is important. And another goal is to ensure that the SKHHP board member and the administration of the city is aware of the applicant's intent to apply and provide the opportunity to communicate any concerns to city staff at that point. So if there's any concerns by the administration or the legislative body, those are being communicated early on so we can either work with the potential applicant on addressing those issues, or so that the applicant doesn't spend time on an application process that they're not going to have support from the board on. Another goal is to allow a city statement on the project to be sent to SKHHP staff by the city within a specified period of time. If we wait too long, then it will draw out the process. So we decided 2 weeks made sense. Another goal to avoid creating additional requirements for an applicant. We don't want to make this process too burdensome that we're detracting folks that might want to apply for these funds. And then we want to avoid any phrasing that may discourage an applicant from applying. So other revised language in your packet, these are, I would say, smaller items, but still wanted to bring to your attention. We added a funding priority of economic opportunity that was recommended by the advisory board. And specifically language was added that states projects that support the advancement of economic opportunity are a high priority. This includes proximity to transit, commercial cores, and connections to workforce development and other services that promote upward mobility, including but not limited to childcare centers, higher education institutions, and libraries. So the advisory board discussed also potentially adding transitional housing as a funding priority, but there wasn't consensus on the board to formally bring that forward, but did just want to bring that to your attention that discussion was had. A sentence was added to state that the template for the letter of consistency will be provided by SKHHP staff. And this is in order to help streamline the process for your jurisdiction's staff, so they're not having to create that on their own. So we would provide that. And then per our discussion last month, I removed the requirement that all the cities providing funding submit a letter of support at the end of the process, since there didn't seem to be any added benefit to that step. So I'm looking to adopt the guidelines today with the caveat that there is a link within our digital copy that is to our application, our combined funders application that Commerce runs. And so I need to wait until they're ready to launch. But in terms of phrasing, I wouldn't anticipate anything changing except one other item to consider. After this item, we're going to talk about House Bill 1590 funds. And if you are supportive of pulling that this year, it would mean adopting a modified version of what you're adopting today next month. So with that, I would love to answer any questions you have and hear any feedback on the proposed language.
Any questions?
So question, feedback, but I don't know if you want to call for adoption or do comments then, or I always forget how this works.
So if you have questions, we can do that. If you have comments, we'll wait until we have a motion in a second. Questions? Tracy, did you have a question?
I'm trying.
Tracy,
Okay. Under review process, step 1, it's on page 8 of 12. It says an initial screening will be conducted by SKIP staff and the staff of the jurisdiction where the project is proposed to be located to determine the complete and staff reserves the right to deny application. So my question I wrote here, are we considering an amendment here consistent with notice of intent on page 3? So I think my question was, were we including staff? Is that a different process than the process on page 3? So the
Yes.
process on page 3 is
Yeah, so the review process is how SKIP staff will review an application
okay.
once it's submitted.
Okay, okay.
just for completion.
And then after that's done, then you move to this pre-app meeting process. Okay, understood.
So ideally, we would be alerted that folks are interested, just reaching out and schedule the pre-application meeting at that point. In order to submit the application, they must have a pre-application meeting. If that makes sense. So, and not to complicate things, and the notice to apply is optional, and it's a more formal document. So they don't have to submit that. They can just give us a call, or, we want to make this pretty easy for folks. But once we know they're interested, we would then schedule the meeting with the jurisdiction staff and SKIP staff as well.
That's all I had until after our motion.
Okay. All right, then is there a, sorry, Brian.
So the removal of the statement about SKIP member city councils that have contributed funding and review, will review and approve and provide a statement of support, that was removed because we didn't need to hear from every single city. The jurisdiction that the project takes place, is that now intended to be captured by the added language on page 3?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, then at what point? And forgive me, I have a little trouble. So city staff will notify the SKIP board or the prospective SKIP board member of the applicant's intent to apply, and that's apply for a permit or apply for the.
Apply for the
The
funding.
grant.
Okay, so then why? Sorry if I'm not catching this. So why is city staff notifying SKIP of the applicant's intent to apply for SKIP capital fund?
So the city staff are notifying the SKIP board member of the applicant's intent to apply. So because at that point we're arranging to schedule the meeting. So at that point, we're suggesting that like this staff work group member, whoever is receiving that notification from us to schedule it, that's the planners, it's your staff work group member. They would then notify the SKIP board member
Okay.
and the administration of the intent to apply.
And when you say administration, what does that mean?
It's up to you. So for strong mayor forms of government, it's informing
Okay, so
the mayor.
so they will notify the respective SKIP board member and their own city administration.
Correct.
Okay. And then they have 2 weeks to say something, then basically.
Correct.
And if they do say something, then what?
So if I guess it's flexible in how things can be said, right? It could be an email or a phone call. It could be a formal letter. I think the language is flexible in how, you want to address that. But really the intent is for us to be notified of these issues early on, to know what the issues are, to know if they're negotiable at all. Maybe it has to do with parking requirements, and that's something we can, work with the applicant on and just communicate any kind of concerns that the city is having. And if for whatever reason, the city is not supportive of the project for whatever reason, that's also the opportunity for us to be aware of that. And that would go into, I think the language says, into the application, should that applicant apply, in the end. But it still provides that open door of, is there any flexibility here or not? And provides us the opportunity to be able to talk with the developer.
So under the scenario that you just explained, so let's just say if the city says we're not comfortable with this, you're saying that SKIP would take that into consideration, or they would say, this is now an issue, we're not going to pursue this anymore?
So I would say, I think the board's been very clear about, the funding intent of the Housing Capital Fund. If the project location jurisdiction, for whatever reason, isn't supportive of a project, the board isn't going to support that.
Sure,
right?
and I appreciate that, but I
Okay.
don't think that's it here.
It's
though.
strong enough language in there.
You
to
say the board has
do that.
expressed that, but this language doesn't express that.
Okay.
This is where I'm going.
Okay, so I think that, we can work on language if you want. My only concern is it being too strong, that it might deter applicants if they see that and think, oh, like they'll just, why waste the time even reaching out, to SKIP if jurisdictions are already thinking that they're going to say no. That's my concern with adding explicit language in that, when I think it can be, I think the board has expressed that very clearly. And, even if we get to that point, the board can say no. The advisory board would have that information. Also, with that letter, it would go into the application, and that information is being presented to the advisory board. And so the advisory board is going to say, well, we got this letter from the jurisdiction. So I think that's the intent.
So I would be more comfortable if we had language that said that the jurisdiction has to basically buy off on it, that they have to provide some indication of support. And that goes into the SKIP decision, not just an input or under consideration, but that SKIP is not going to take action on a project in a city where the city itself is not supportive. I think that needs to be clear. And I appreciate what you're saying about
That's the
indication to
next
the
step.
applicants and flexibility, but that's really important for my jurisdiction.
So Dana, do you have a question, or is it more along the lines of this discussion? I'm just-
It's along, yeah, I think to most reinforcing Brian's point, my concern being when this board isn't this board
Right.
without that clarification.
Question on mine.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
I can wait until this line of discussion has been finished, because I have a question later in the document.
So I think some of what's going on right now will have to wait until we have a motion on the floor, and then there will be amendments. So if you have questions, Eric, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I'm on page 6, and I was just thinking through the loan and regulatory terms, period affordability, and other award terms. And I just wanted to check. I wasn't sure the legal advice that has gone into this, and also the legal framework that exists in Washington State, also potentially with the IRS around granting. I was interested to see the terms for covenants being placed on properties, and it seems like that might be a requirement for both loans and grants. And I was just wondering, Claire, in terms of the legal advice that's gone into this, is there a really good legal framework in Washington State that and in case law that exists to help guide us on how to condition funds like that, whether it's a loan or a grant, and then putting covenants on properties to ensure that, for example, even if we're only 10% of the budget of a project, that covenant would still be bound by our contribution. If you could just help explain the legal framework or the legal advice that we've gotten around that. And I'm sure maybe city staff already have clear answers on this, but it's just an opportunity for me to learn more as well, so I could talk with our council about it when this comes up.
Sure. So I could talk a little bit about it. And I'll be very honest, this is the contracting part that comes with this is something I'm actually currently actively learning about, because this is the first time we will have done that. And so just for your awareness, the legal framework, I guess I just want to say that these guidelines that you're looking at were developed, most of this section, all of this section actually was developed last year. And so I know, my predecessor worked really hard to ensure that this was bulletproof. In terms of projects applying for grants or loans, that's something that often you'll find in options for this type of funding. So, and it just depends on the financing for the project. Oftentimes folks want the loans because it needs to, merge with their low-income housing tax credit. It has to be in the form of a loan. Other times they want grants. And so that is often an option. And in terms of, I think that's about it.
Claire, can I just jump in with a quick
Yes.
clarification? I think that the covenant is really where my
Okay.
attention was drawn, and conditioning the loans or the grants on the presence of a covenant on that property. And I just wasn't sure how strong the legal framework is, or if there's case law about that, that's shown that those types of covenants are durable. For example, if we were to be a 10% or 5% contribution of the overall project size, but we were the only funder that was requiring a covenant be applied, do covenants of that type end up being durable, particularly for a 50-year term? And so that's just where I was uncertain, as I was thinking both in terms of state law and also federal. I'm just not sure if those types of requirements have stood the test of time, or if there might be case law out there that's shown that they might not be very durable.
So what I do know is, most of these, or probably all of these affordable projects have covenants in place to ensure affordability for what they are contracted for. And if for some reason they're not able to make that affordability work, then there are clauses in these documents that say the money needs to be returned. So just wanted you to have that. In terms of case law, yeah, I'm not an attorney, so I would need to look at that. But what I do know is that all of these the public funders projects have covenants in place, and that's a very standard thing.
Okay, great. Then it's just a learning opportunity for me to understand that this is more commonplace and how a lot of these projects are treated from the legal standpoint. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
I was just gonna say the same thing, that is standard practice for King County, is to have a covenant that runs with the property for 50 years. Or sometimes longer, along with our.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just 50 years is a long time, and a lot will change in terms of the economy and in terms of the demographics of Seattle and probably ownership of any particular piece of property. So just it's great to be learning more about how we do it in King County.
although the older you get, 50 years doesn't seem. Just gonna put that out there for you for future reference. All right, any other questions before we entertain a motion?
I want to go back to Brian's comment about the jurisdiction signing off and providing approval, because I think I hesitate on that language, like requiring the jurisdiction to sign off. Because I think some jurisdictions they don't necessarily want that administrative hurdle to push it through their legislative process.
Right, but you got a 2-week comment period built into that, so you just provide some
If.
preparation time.
I think the language is if they choose that.
Right, so I'm
Right.
saying if
Oh,
they
okay.
choose that, then
Yeah.
Skip needs to honor that comment.
Oh, okay.
And this,
I hear
this is kind of dancing
Got
around
it.
this, but this is a big enough deal for my
Yeah.
jurisdiction, that's one of the main values that it finds in Skip, and if
Okay.
this is not in there, this is gonna be a problem.
Okay, yeah. Let me work on language. I would love to hear from other members of the board.
I think we'll probably
You
want to
want
go
the
to the
motion
motion.
first?
Yeah.
and
Okay,
then
sorry.
Discussion.
Let-
Yes. All right, Tracy.
Oh,
Make a motion.
Sure, I move that we. No, it's good. I move that we approve I do adopt the 2023 Housing Capital Plan guidelines.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? You know what? Those were all almost simultaneous. I'm gonna go Dana, sorry, Tracy.
Right, I'm gonna say I do agree with Brian. I think this is something that we spent a lot of time on last year talking about. We are in this together, and so if we need to eliminate the opportunity for jurisdictions to do something to one, right? And we can't, I don't know how you define like the if-thens, because every jurisdiction is there's gonna be that project that's like, this doesn't work. We have seen other organizations like Skip where the organization has taken on its own thought process separate from the jurisdictions, and then they've been pitted against each other. And I think it's important for us to say, you know what, we all are supporting this goal of affordable housing, but we can't do it at the expense of one of each other. And I just think it needs to be clear. And I worry about, well, we're all sitting around the table nodding our heads next year or the year after when it's a different board. If it is not someplace in writing,
Mhm.
we lose
doesn't
that
exist.
intent.
Sonari.
My initial comments were much lighter, which was to change the suggested amendment to change the first word to jurisdiction instead of city.
Yeah.
Given that the county is also in sphere of influence, not that we're pushing projects to Skip, but in the event that one does apply, and then more of a grammar note that it says within the 2 weeks of such notification, a statement may be submitted, but that leaves it pretty vague as to who may submit a statement. And so just flipping that around to be a jurisdiction may submit a statement. I was trying to draft up some, in response to Brian and Dana's comments, some additional compromise language, potentially something along the lines of exactly what I think you just said out loud, Claire, which is Skip staff will work with applicants to address any concerns articulated by the host jurisdiction in such a statement. In the event a jurisdiction's concerns cannot be resolved, Skip would not fund the applicant project or something along that line. So it gives you that if then. I don't know if there's a way we want to qualify concerns in case a jurisdiction just happens to write some random thing that doesn't really matter to them, but I hope that wouldn't be the case. Thoughts? So sorry, those are my thoughts, not I'm soliciting.
Sonari. hold on to that language.
Mhm.
Tracy.
So this isn't quite as detailed, but it would be in regard to that same kind of amendment at the very end of the sentence. It says within 2 weeks, and then at the very end, it says part of the project's housing capital fund application, and the executive board will honor any preferences expressed in a submitted statement or in a jurisdictional statement. So that gives the promise that the executive board will honor whatever preferences, and it's gentle enough to say, instead of saying a refusal or instead of saying a rejection, but it just does state whatever that jurisdiction. It requires the board to honor those.
My
So-
thoughts are, if we do have a letter in hand early in the process, I wouldn't even want that applicant to submit an application, right? We don't want to have them go through that if we already know it's not going to be supported.
Well, it's a gentle way. You were concerned about discouraging statements, right? So this is a gentle way of saying, if the preference expressed
Mm.
is we don't want the project. So this amendment doesn't include the word rejection, or it doesn't include the word refusal, but it includes the word preference. So it doesn't discourage somebody from applying, but we understand that means a preference could be no. Trying to go along with your, don't want to intimidate an applicant.
But at the same time, if the jurisdiction is not interested in that applicant submitting,
That's their
they need to
preference.
know, right? They need to know.
And it's very different. That's where I think we have some conversation, the concurrency piece, like it can fit into all of our plans and fit in our zoning. It's very different. Like, and we can't, and a city can't say no to that project, but it is very different for a city to pay for a project.
Right.
That's, I think, where the struggle is, right? Is like, you can't necessarily say,
Can't build it here,
yeah, but we need to,
but you don't have to
you don't have
financially
to pay
support
for
it.
it.
Right. Christina, and then Eric online.
So Tracy covered a lot of what I wanted to say, but I know the concern was discouraging and aggressive language. It doesn't have to be that. I know with similar, next month, we're bringing back our discussion of the 5090 funds. And this might be a deal breaker, as there's only a handful of cities that are or have the option to contribute 5090 funds. Or we still have to protect our cities, regardless of, and I'm assuming projects are going to differ. You can't assume that we don't want any project. If there's a city that doesn't want any project, no, but the projects are going to be of different flavors, and maybe there's one that's going to fit a particular jurisdiction better than another project. So that should, I believe that language needs to be just tweaked a little bit to allow for a jurisdiction to favor that over maybe another one. I lost my next train of thought, but that's the gist of it. Because I agreed with Dana, like this, just like all councils, this table is going to look different just a few years down the road. And if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So, thank you.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple thoughts. First, as we're thinking in terms of covenants being a 50-year covenant, we're also thinking in terms of SKIP being a long-term organization, 50 years or more, perhaps. And I think asking that question of what would keep members of an organization like this at the table long-term would just be a high level of trust in each other and confidence that anything that we're going to do together truly would be together. And I know that sometimes it'll come down to voting in a majority making a decision. But I think on something like this, it's probably is the case where there would need to be unanimity, or at least the ability for a jurisdiction to have a veto. And I think that's just really good governance and something that'll help keep everyone at the table across changes in board composition and changes in electeds. My second thought, though, is personally, as I think of who is the audience this document's communicating to, I think that if they're going to be doing a housing project of this size and sophistication, they're probably a bit more immune to discouragement than a normal person who might apply for something. They've already shown a level of seriousness and organization that's allowed them to think about developing something big. And if that's the case, I don't think that language of this kind would be discouraging. It would just be something they'd need to keep in mind and consult with their legal team about, or consult with what other executive is as part of making those kinds of decisions. But I think it's great to be clear with the guideline, and however the terminology is phrased, I think as far as the developer is concerned, it's just business.
Thank you, Eric. Other comments or thoughts? Or if there is a desire to have any amendments to the motion that's on the floor?
So I have scribbled some language to share that is probably very similar, but I would also suggest that instead of adopting any amended language today, that we can bring it back for final approval at the next meeting.
So you're wanting to table the motion that's on the floor?
Does that give you enough time for this year's round?
Yes, I mean, ideally, we would have language today.
So is there a desire from anyone here to table it to the next meeting?
To get the right language, I would support that.
So I guess it depends on whether you think we have the right language available today or not.
I'd like to hear it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. If you're
Ding, ding,
comfortable.
ding.
Sure.
And I'd like to know, I mean, it's hard to know right now, but are we gonna be amending this anyway because of the 1590 conversation? In which
Possibly.
case, I don't think it matters so much if we are trying to reach a thing today.
Yeah, that's true.
The benefit of getting it today is that we can put this conversation to bed today and focus on 1590 next month, I guess. That would be the weighing pros and cons.
If you're, I think we were comfortable with changing it today, but if you're comfortable with your suggestion to table it, so what do you?
I would love to share the language that I have here. I think it meets your needs. So at the end of this, can we pull the slide up? All right. So leave this as is, but delete, actually, well, I could type it in there, but I'll just tell you at the end of the sentence, delete the period and say, and should the jurisdiction not be supportive, SKIP staff will inform the applicant and that proposal will not be considered.
Is there a
I feel
way
like
that,
that's too discouraging?
I don't know that we need to worry about discouragement. We
Okay.
have money, right? If a developer is going to want funding, they're not going to be easily discouraged. Is there a way that we can copy that onto a slide and type in that new language so everybody can see it instead of trying to see it in their heads? Will that help everyone?
Can I just make a really quick comment as well?
Yes, Eric.
If it turned out we found that it was discouraging, then I think could just come back to us as a recommendation from staff that they've noted a track record of discouragement from applicants, and we have a shortage of applicants, and we could solve the problem at that time. But I think it might just be imagining a problem that doesn't materialize.
Mouse is not working. on
Dana?
this.
Just think that very last end of the sentence, maybe will not move forward for consideration. feels like a more complete statement.
Dorsal, are you able to,
Jason.
because I don't have control.
Where it's on my screen, I've got it pulled up.
Thank you, Jason. You're amazing.
Yes, thank you, Jason. I liked what you just said, but I was distracted.
We will not move forward for consideration.
Yeah,
While they're doing that, could you read just that tail end of it?
Shall not move,
Should a,
shall not move forward for consideration.
Backing up.
and should the jurisdiction?
And should the jurisdiction not be supportive, could say the proposal shall not move forward for consideration.
The question for me is if y'all want to allow for time for any back and forth, which I think is what I heard from Claire earlier, or just say like, we would know by then, because they should have come and talked to us, in which case we probably know that they can't change much to be.
Yeah. And that tells me that that 2-week time period would be. There would be a lot of back and forth already.
And then did we want the word may that, but this, it says may consult with their legislative body instead of will, or not even just the applicants intend to apply and comma and consult with their legislative body on the project.
My concern in looking at that, if we don't keep it as it is that you could potentially run into some disjointedness. You could have a city staff member that is like full on, this makes sense. Then you have a skip board member who may be a council member or not part of administration, or you have administration that's not. So I just wanted to tie it up so we like all the parties involved were on the same page and it fits for all of our types, our forms of government.
Do we have that? Do we have it written up that we can look at in its entirety?
I don't have control, Dorsal.
I do.
Okay. So, okay, you have it there. Okay, thank you.
It'll appear in red as you type.
Sorry, it's a little, there's a lot going on up here. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. So. Should the. Oops, sorry. And I will make that so you can actually see that. Okay.
We redacted.
Let's see. Wait, I don't have a mouse, so here we got this. Here we go. Here we go.
There we go. Very good.
And let's delete that.
Okay. City staff from the project location jurisdiction shall notify the respective SKIP executive board member and administration of the applicant's intent to apply and may consult with their legislative body on the project proposal. Within 2 weeks of such notification, a statement may be submitted on the project proposal to SKIP staff as part of the project's Housing Capital Fund application. And should the jurisdiction not be supportive, the proposal shall not move forward for consideration.
Maybe a period after application and make it a last sentence.
Got it.
Thing about really long sentences.
Yeah.
I have a
Yes.
long.
I had a colleague who used to have child.
Tracy?
Fix the sentence. She said,
So help me out with this sentence. So I appreciated what you said, Dana, about trying to incorporate all of our different types of government. So if you're respect your executive board member is a staff person and not an elected. And you're in a city like my council manager form of government. You, and the word may is in there. This could all happen without any of your council, any of your electeds knowing.
Oh, I see what you're saying because of the May consult.
Right, so you could totally cut your electeds out of the process if you're.
In a council
city-
manager form of government.
In a council manager for, yeah, or even in a strong mayor, if your representative at this table is not your mayor. or
That's
not-
why I put in their executive board member and administration.
Okay.
Because
and then there you
administration
go.
means they have to come and talk to
And
me, yeah.
in my situation, yeah, that would not be an.
It would be your
elected,
city manager.
Right,
huh?
all of the city managers. If they put may.
The definition of administration. I'm trying to see if I still want to change that city to jurisdiction or
Yeah.
not, because I don't want to have to notify the executive
Yeah,
when
no.
someone applies for housing. plans.
Come on.
Maybe I'll just stay out of it.
Ryan, did you have a?
I was gonna defer, I'll come back.
I was gonna defer to you.
Oh, okay, then I'll jump in. Why not? The question I had is it implied for the current funding cycle? Because that's the only other thing I want to say is like, with these, I would expect it could be quite possible that it might not meet certain qualifications first go around, but they might come back the next year. I'm not sure if it needs to say in this funding cycle or if that's implied, and I'm just really wordsmithing this.
That's a
Because I wouldn't want to discourage them from coming back. If there's the opportunity to work with that jurisdiction, so it's quite common things don't get through in
point.
one cycle. That was my only thought.
Good point. Thoughts on that?
I guess I would just add that just to share from our recent experience, which I think is helpful to ground truth something. And that is that all three projects that came for SKIP funding, two of which were funded, all went through planning commission and city review and went before the council as part of that process. And so council was aware of all three projects, not only because they were part of the, or potentially part of the demonstration program, but just in general as part of the plan review so early on. By the time a project gets to this point where they're asking for SKIP funding, we're like the last 10th amount of money, like we're, a lot of processes have been met prior to them sort of asking for that last bit of money. And really all that we're saying as a jurisdiction, even if we said we didn't support it, is the use of Burien's funds within SKIP, not respecting or not saying the rest of your funds. So I understand that we wouldn't do that to each other. I get that, but I just think it's important to understand the sort of where the reality is here and what happens ahead of time leading into a SKIP consideration.
So I think that gets back to my concern, like all through those steps, it's not a jurisdiction, you work it through the process. And if the zoning exists and all of those kinds of things, that is very different than saying, and we are going to help you pay for it.
Yeah,
There are things that get built and can't all the time. That I'm
Sure.
like, I really wish that wouldn't happen, but I
Sure.
don't have any grounds to say no. It's
Sure.
not in my purview.
yeah.
There's a difference between that and saying, and it's
I don't
not,
have-
and it's not just, it's, in this case, it's not just Burien's money, it's everybody's money. So
Yeah,
it is not wanting to, I don't want to take Kent money and force a project on Burien,
I hear that.
even if you're
During the
like,
week.
I don't want to spend. And so I think that that's the goal in this is
Our goal is to fund projects that are supported by the entire
Yeah.
body.
I loved it when those projects came forward last year and
Yeah.
we saw you say thumbs up, you
Yeah.
want these projects. That to me is like the best thing that can happen.
For
Right. And I
sure.
want to make sure that every jurisdiction has that same positive experience.
Yep.
Because I don't want somebody to get a project that they're like, this is not a good thing for my city.
Yeah,
And then feel like, you know what? This group that I was a part of did something to us and then decide to bail.
I hear that.
Mhm.
Can I say something real quick? So I think I think this language works, to get it in front of even in like city manager forms of government, because it's incumbent upon the city manager to act, you know, at the will of the elected body. And so even though it's not saying, you know, in the beginning, the respective SKIP executive board member and administration, I still feel like, you know, they're going to be notified of this. I would hate to put in like, I'm thinking like the alternative is elected leadership, but that just leaves it kind of squishy. And then it also creates this kind of challenge of staff trying to get that in front of electeds, and that poses its own challenges. And so I think by alerting the city manager, they can decide, you know, if this is worth just putting on the radar of the mayor or the deputy mayor, or, you know, the elected voice for housing, whatever that
I
is.
guess what you're saying is that it's going to be up to each jurisdiction then to, if this is an issue that they care about, to make sure that their representative on this board is elected. Because if it isn't, then that's the, like in you, with you got, well, with you, right? Your staff, and if your city isn't, your electeds aren't engaged, then something will happen without their, could easily happen without their knowledge, and that's their decision.
I actually think you have more of a guarantee that that won't happen when you have a staff person sitting here. We're not gonna not take things in front of our council, so, you know, just so you know.
Well, it happens.
There's some job
I
security.
just want to say, it
Well.
happens, right? I mean, it might not happen in theory, but it happens. You know, staff sometimes in certain cities they want to put something through, and it happens. Yeah. So, but anyway, okay.
Brian,
So at the very beginning, city staff shall notify, who drives that sort of time zero? Like, let's say city staff doesn't do that in a timely manner. When does the clock start if they're kind of dragging their feet? Or can they drag their feet and the clock doesn't start? I mean, should we tie it to the pre-application meeting and have that be sort of the time zero? Because I feel like it's a little nebulous of when that starts.
My only concern is the pre-application meeting, the time that it's going to take place. It could be actually later in the process, just depending on when we hear from the applicant. I guess I'm just worried that I want enough time for an applicant who's interested to be able to submit their application and hear any concerns before the deadline at September 15th. Does that make sense? And so I think the more time we have is better. So my goal in this is, as soon as we hear that notification, as soon as they're reaching out to Dorsler or myself, and we're reaching out to staff to schedule these meetings, that's when that conversation is happening. So that can happen in tandem with, it's going to take a while to like get a meeting on the books, on the calendar, right? Scheduling back and forth, and, you know, because there's going to be a lot of people that need to be in that meeting. So this is the attempt at.
Right, the SKIP and the applicant are both dependent on city staff starting this clock, but there's nothing to really nail that down, is my point.
and I think, Claire, you're saying once you receive the notification, but let's just say it's an email, and for whatever reason, it's sent to you and you're on vacation for 2 weeks. That 2-week clock is already over. If depending on what we call the initializing of that 2-week time period, if it's when notification goes to you, you might not receive it for a while, but it's already been sent. So we do have to identify when that 2-week time clock begins.
I was curious about that too. It didn't specify.
Maybe it's upon acknowledgement by SKIP staff.
So, let's see.
Is it before the pre-application meeting or after the pre-application meeting? Because you can use,
I think it depends.
you can use that as the,
Well, that's what Brian was just saying with the pre-app, or we were saying with the pre-application meeting, but I think the pre-application meeting may be much later in the process.
Could
Correct?
be, it could be. So the way I was, my intent in this, and I can clarify that, is the notification is, it's not I'm being notified of the applicant's intent to apply. It's that I'm reaching out to the city staff, and I guess that's when I was thinking the clock might start, but you're right, we probably need some clarification and when that clock starts.
Yeah, I think Skip needs to define and control time zero and the deadline both. And so could you explain one more time why the pre-op meeting would not work as the, from 2 weeks from the pre-op meeting? I didn't quite follow that.
So 2 weeks before the pre-app meeting,
No,
is that what you mean?
So
Or
if
after?
From the
they
pre-app.
have the intent to apply, which is optional, and then they have to have a pre-application, which is mandatory. Before the applications are due. So could we not have the pre-app be the time, when the 2 weeks starts?
So the pre-app meeting,
Yeah.
have
so
that
we-
be starting the time at the meeting?
At the meeting.
That
So
would,
the city's got they've met with the city is now aware, and if the city has any comments, it's now on them to provide a statement, and they have 2 weeks to do it.
that would be, then that would require all pre-app meetings be done. If September 15th is the deadline, all pre-app meetings have to occur by September 1. Is that right? Yes. To be able to have the two
Yeah.
weeks, yeah, the 2 weeks.
It doesn't give the applicant much time though, right?
Right,
I guess.
but I guess the intent behind this is that we don't want them to go through the trouble of an application if the jurisdiction's not on board, and this solves
That's
that.
true, that's true.
Does it have to be September 15th?
Yes,
Because we have to back up into when the funding has to be approved or what the cutoffs are.
I just realized that the video is showing me and only me, so apologies for you, for those attending online. No, it's okay. All right, great. So we can certainly add that. So let's.
So I
see.
think within 2 weeks of such notification at the
Within 2 weeks, within 2 weeks of the
I would
pre-application.
just say, yeah,
2
within
weeks
2 weeks
of
of the pre-application meeting.
meeting. Okay. Eric, can you see that online? Eric?
Do I need to unmute him on my?
No, you should be able to.
How's everyone feeling? Because we don't have a motion yet for an amendment. We're still figuring it out. I just want to make sure before someone does make a motion for an amendment. Sonari?
I think I am still caught on this administration word, and like whether or not, because I do think there's some value, we have had some community feelings about different projects in Skyway, for example, where we would know if a certain project came in that we want to notify folks and understand. But I, again, would not want to be on the hook for being required to notify the executive under this process, because it's just sort of meaningless given the scale and the way we're structured. So could administration mean Leo? Could it mean Simon? Is it open to interpretation in y'all's view, who've been in government longer than me? Yeah.
Well, if we've sort of identified when the clock starts, do we need that first statement at all? We're saying you have 2 weeks to comment, city. However you want to do that. However you're structured as far as your government is structured is up to you. We just need a comment from you.
It's important to me to have something in there because I worry about different. If you have a council member at the table, so like in my city, if I've got one council member at the table that loves the project, they don't have any any responsibility to come and then say something to me or to the rest of the council, and then the clock runs and you're sort of out of luck. So I'm trying to build in a guarantee that everybody is involved. Or it may be one that they don't like, and then is that single council member responsible for providing that comment? And it's something that, you know.
And I want to do a time check. So we're
Yes.
over time on this particular item. And I'll just throw it out there that you will be looking at the guidelines every year. So,
Yeah.
you know, you have to adopt these every year. So just in case there's like stress about, you know, we have to have it absolutely.
But we want to make it as good as we can.
Absolutely.
Perfect is the enemy or the evil of good enough. We know that, but just wanting to make sure because we want to get it right for this round.
Mhm.
And when we know better, we do better every time. So going back to Sonari, do you want it to be jurisdictional staff or do you want
I'm
it?
just gonna leave it in city.
So honestly, if I read administration with a lowercase a, I think it could be Leo. I think
Yeah.
it could be.
Okay, yeah, I mean, in that case, I do think that part of it for me is that then Skip staff reach out to us and let us know, right, that we are somehow included in the process. I don't think it's likely that you're gonna see a Skyway project or something this year. But
Or just remove city altogether, staff from the project location jurisdiction.
that's true.
That takes in,
Yeah.
that
It
encompasses all of us.
encompasses King, that makes perfect sense.
So take out city and at the very beginning and just capitalize staff.
And then can we change where it says within 2 weeks of the pre-application meeting, a jurisdiction may submit a statement? Spend a lot of time correcting passive voice. Or no. Yes.
Everybody good with that?
Move to amend the motion for that.
We have a motion and a second to amend the statement, and I'm just gonna read it in case Eric can't see it. Staff from the project location jurisdiction shall notify the respective SKIP executive board member and administration of the applicant's intent to apply and may consult with their legislative body on the project proposal. Within 2 weeks of the pre-application meeting, a jurisdiction may submit a statement on the project proposal to SKIP staff as part of the project's housing capital fund application. Should the jurisdiction not be supportive, the proposal shall not move forward for consideration in the current funding cycle. Everybody good? Eric?
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, perfect. All those in favor of the amendment that I just read, we had a motion and a second. All those in favor of the amendment that I just read, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. The amendment passes. All right. Are there any other concerns before we move to approve the document, where am I here? The 2023, sorry, funding guidelines. All right, there is a motion on the floor. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor of approving the Housing Capital Fund 2023 funding guidelines as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. Look at that, we got them passed. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. That was kind of fun. I don't know about you.
Right.
So,
Lives, right?
so just want to do a time check. It's 2:31. We went about 20 minutes over, maybe a little bit more on that, 30 minutes over. So we may need to postpone you know, one of the items at the end, but I think I can breeze through some of this.
I do have a hard stop at 3.
Okay, thank you. So wanted to bring up the 0.1% sales and use tax, the House Bill 1590. Just remind you a little bit about what this is. And just want to provide some background on the slide. You can see the RCW that it's associated with. It authorized jurisdictions to impose that 0.1% local sales tax to support affordable housing, behavioral health facilities, and other supportive services. There was a limited window for cities to act in 2020 before the county started collecting that. And so 4 of our skip cities collect this. So it's Covington, Kent, and Maple Valley, and Renton. So the RCW says that at least 60% of the funds collected under the RCW must be used for the following purposes, and that is all listed on your slide. I think the key takeaway is that the 60% is generally a capital portion. So it's constructing or acquiring affordable housing. It could also be constructing or acquiring behavioral health related facilities, also acquiring land for either of these purposes, and then funding the operations and maintenance cost of new units of affordable housing. And also this RCW has very specific populations that must be served. So, and those are listed on the slide. That's persons with behavioral health disabilities, veterans, seniors, folks experiencing homelessness, and others. And just a quick mention, so King County uses their House Bill 1590 funds to support the health through housing, which supports it's 24/7 supportive services in buildings that they've purchased. So briefly, so we've started conversations with cities, with our skip cities, collecting the 1590 revenue. And I wanted to just put that on the slide for you to give you just a brief update where we're at. You know, are folks interested in pooling with skip? If so, what are the amounts we're kind of talking about here? So Covington, we had a great conversation. I presented at Covington Council Tuesday night. I would say I should caveat this, council member Soltis, that the impression I got is that this conversation has been going on quite a while at Covington of whether to pool or not with skip. And so I listed you as a yes of 50% of the capital. They have not taken formal legislative action. Go ahead. Yes, please.
The conversation happened a long time ago.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll say that, and then there hasn't been conversation that kind of is a surprise to me. This could have happened when my predecessor was on council and or not on skip. It's possible. We are bringing it to council for our next, not next council meeting, but next month. But our intent is to do it before the deadline, for sure. It was actually not through Human Services. We went back and checked, and it can be councilmatic. So yeah, so that cuts out a lot of time, but we are bringing it to council, and hopefully that remains true. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Yes, so these are, I'll caveat all of this preliminary. And so Kent has taken legislative action making the commitment of 100% to pool with skip for that capital portion. So 100% of the 60%, if that makes sense. And you can see the totals on here. Maple Valley's currently having those conversations. It hasn't come to council yet. There will likely be some amount being pooled with skip. And then City of Renton is possibly pooling with skip and still discussing other opportunities like working with the Renton Housing Authority. So what we're looking at potentially this year is almost $5 million available, which is a pretty incredible opportunity for South King County. And then ongoing with just these 2 cities, if all goes well, we're looking at 2.4 million every year. So, and then with additional contributions, if Maple Valley's interested in pooling, same with Renton, that could grow.
It's on the agenda for ballot for July 10th, just so you know.
Thank you. So the question that I just needed to bring to the board is if you are supportive of pooling this year, if you're supportive of SKIP staff, spending that time and energy to make this happen this year. And the things that we would need to have in place in order to make that happen is I would incorporate 1590 funds into the guidelines that you just adopted, which I think is a fairly straightforward thing. You've already established your funding priorities and the process for considering applications. And, the recommendation would be to only solicit projects for the acquisition and the construction of the affordable housing instead of behavioral health facilities, which, that's not our area of expertise. And then operations and maintenance as well, I would say for this first year, to postpone that as a possibility. And if we do hear that, developers want that funding, then we can revisit that next year. But those contracts are really different is what I hear. They're much more complicated. They require a lot more staff capacity. So we would need to adopt the guidelines next month at our meeting in order to make this deadline, which would mean that I would present you the language, in a week or two, so you can mull it over. We can go back and forth individually. Don't CC the whole board.
No, when you send it, if you would BCC everyone,
Certainly.
that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I will absolutely do that. And then we would be working with contributing jurisdictions to receive that formal intent to pool with SKIP, working with them to just get something in writing, some legislative action that says, yes, we want to pool, here's how much, here's the percentage, just anything that assures me with your adoption of the guidelines that we can put out an accurate figure to solicit bids for. So that would need to happen by July 21st, which is when you're adopting the guidelines. And then moving forward, we'd be drafting joint ILAs between the contributing jurisdictions and SKIP. They'd be reviewing with their legal teams to make sure that works for them. It's basically going to mirror the 1406 ILA that I think most of you are party to. So that would happen in July and August, and then presenting the ILA for adoption in council. So would love to hear from the board if you're supportive of pooling this new revenue source for the Housing Capital Fund this year.
Tracy?
Absolutely. Comment for a long time about it. 3 cheers. Yeah, I think it's a great priority for our SKIP staff.
I think it's something that we've talked about around this table since $1590 came into existence, and then COVID hit, and the ability to use those $1590 and $1406 in other areas became a critical need. Any other thoughts? I mean, I saw a lot of nods and grins. Any concern over moving towards utilizing $1590? Maybe that's an easier conversation. Don't see any. So moving forward, having Claire and Dorsal working on taking those actions and getting all of the verbiage and everything ready for the cities that would be entering into the ILA for the $1590 we're good with. Okay.
Thank you. Super. So we have just under 20 minutes. Wanted to just bring forward this high priority work plan item and just get a little bit of feedback from you on what this item means to you. Because I think it could mean something different for each of you. And this funding item is on the slide. For those just listening, it's develop a long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund and facilitate conversations with member jurisdictions to identify and explore dedicated sources of revenue for affordable housing at the local and regional level. So I'm actually going to skip this one, this slide. So I did email a spreadsheet to you, and you should have a copy in front of you that lists potential revenue sources. So, you know, those are just really for your awareness, just educationally, here are some of the items out there that cities are using to generate new revenue for affordable housing and some potential things that we could do. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of the start, but I did want to just put that in front of you for just general thoughts. I had planned to go through these each one by one and give you a summary of what they are. I feel like we're a little too short on time, which is fine because we had a really fantastic conversation earlier. So I'm actually going to jump straight into the small group activity. If you're not comfortable talking about those potential revenue sources, you don't need to go there. If you are someone that feels pretty comfortable with discussing those, if your jurisdictions are supportive or not, don't worry about it. Either way, but I think really the conversation in the small groups that I would like you to have is what that work plan item means to you. What does this long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund mean to you? And are new sources of revenue needed for the Housing Capital Fund? If so, are there dedicated sources of revenue your jurisdiction would support or not support? I think we should spend 9 minutes in small groups talking about this. And I have asked members of our staff work group to sit with each of the small groups to take those notes so that I can hear what that conversation was, so that I can better understand in order to move this work plan item forward. So if you would get into small groups of, let's do 3. 3 persons, let's see, and even just where you're closest here, I'm seeing it, maybe a group of 4, and then, so yeah, so right here, 3, that would be helpful. And Nicholas is going to call in Councilmember Zimmerman to one of the
I'm
groups.
so sorry.
You're fine. Mhm.
My son might have COVID, so it's a good thing I'm not there.
Where do you want? Which one?
I was going to join.
Eric, can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put Eric there on this. Eric, you're-
That's fine. You're right.
Yeah.
Eric on the line.
Payroll taxing, definitely.
Yeah, this is third person.
Everybody else.
Hello, yes.
3,1506, 3,1590. So we had no funding at all.
Okay, gonna put you on speaker.
In my mind, we've answered this long-term funding.
Perhaps
thing.
the,
Certainly did not
Okay, thanks.
support it on the work plan, which I
All
will
right, I'll take your notes.
be okay, but if that passed.
Yes, are you there?
Like, I feel like this is the only piece that I think we're missing from our original
Would you like to start?
was the. So what does it look like?
And it's no longer on the PowerPoint slide,
Yeah.
we're talking about the strategy.
And it's
Right?
going
Um,
correct, and I certainly
When
don't
when I
think we
think
have
of
any.
strategy, I think it really comes back to. just think
We're seeing that in.
about-
But this is, if I remember.
Strategy.
On our work.
And for that means always keep it all in mind, of recognizing that
None of
there's
us anticipated.
work plans and stakeholders that need to constantly working
This is in
to help
lieu
get us
of
towards that goal.
Bees.
So I think,
in lieu- in
we've
lieu of
identified a
paving
couple
a
of like,
courthouse
some
in
strategy.
and
for all the
For those
and
jurisdictions
new
that
sources of
would
revenue.
require
That's certainly gonna be a key enabler of the goal. And I think that'll be city teams, having the staffing and resources to.
I think it's just like we, like.
In a decentralized way, identify potential sources of revenue. And
I don't know, I could
almost
be
a
completely,
crowdfunding
but
approach.
in my mind, when I was like, before, I don't, it wasn't about this, it was
I
about.
bring in additional incremental revenue possibilities to support these kinds of projects, but you know, it's also kind of a vague or really big and ambiguous statement, and so that's my own interpretation of it, but I think it's probably one of those things where we can do exactly what we're doing right now. We just sit down and talk about it and have a consensus as to what it means and what we do about it.
Beyond.
She had a list on that previous slide, maybe that's what you wrote.
No, it's the matrix.
Oh, right.
Right,
Eric,
yeah.
Eric, you have that matrix?
It's a spreadsheet
There's.
that was,
We're gonna pull it up.
it starts with property tax,
Not a
city,
bad
local needs.
idea.
I'm thinking like.
Whichever you're looking at it right now.
Great, a lot of your long-term projects and, you know.
Is there one of those that
That certain
sticks out to
plan
you
also
as a
to,
potential
Not just.
possibility or option?
So
You know,
9 and
Mark,
10.
I'll just speak from the perspective of our city. We're anomalous.
I
You know,
mean, I
we don't
think
have
long-term.
a large tax base, and a lot of these funding options are something that's really hard for us to generate locally. I recognize, just because I also have professional background in this.
We are set up to be.
Philanthropic dimensions of funding. I think
So,
has been
I don't know.
underutilized. And I think there's probably an opportunity for municipalities and local organizations like ours, or also the state and federal, to have closer relationships with the philanthropic community. Because the vast most of the resources in philanthropy is truly and the extent to which those resources are applied to affordable housing is just a very, very, very small slice of the overall pie. For example, climate and the environment has done a good job positioning itself for vast philanthropic resources, and I think in terms of percentage, after education and the arts, climate and environment is probably the number one thing funded in the philanthropic community. But I think affordable housing probably has a bit of a branding and marketing problem. And there's probably an opportunity, particularly in the Northwest, for us to help raise its profile and access significant philanthropic funds.
Is there a
Yeah.
goal?
Everything else.
Everything else.
So the next smallest city here, at least in our group of four, and
Question we talked about
we
and stuff.
are in a pretty similar position.
Is
In fact,
there-
we
And it's sales tax money, so short of recession, the money.
Bare minimum we need, like, have to keep
Yeah,
our,
I mean,
That.
to keep our residents somewhere.
every time I look at.
I mean, if we went to all the
Vital
things.
things.
So,
I
I do know
completely
that
agree
that's
with you.
right back.
I think it's underutilized.
That we're redistributing, and so you're really counting on that, those higher end ones.
Markets
for discussion.
Huge.
It does.
Especially that 9 and.
If you look at what their taxes are.
I like third municipal.
Specific corporations, they write taxes off of.
The unintended are that you
Yeah,
have.
that's- I think we should potentially tap into that database. I know we would not.
I would, the only other thing I would say is.
Yeah, we just.
Taxes
I was looking at our, when our, like.
Depends on how much-
Our roads are falling apart.
You know,
and
whatever,
Waste, for
kind of like,
example,
don't
make sure you don't get fallen
have-
out, or, you know, Tim, I'm in this kind of long. Basically,
We're in a similar
situation,
situation, but it would
So
either,
incremental
again,
to
back to the states.
impact.
That is a function I believe in and state and federal projects.
Thinking downstream, like, okay, what are the things that
I mean,
don't exist right now that could
Looking at
exist?
number 7,
I think that's one of our struggles, and not.
I don't want to drive
County,
away
But King County
developments
has
either.
a lot of things that wind up on our ballots, right? We talk about it a lot as a city.
But
We don't
yeah,
have
mine
the
is
chance to catch our breath and do things for us
we're on the board.
because there's a King County something
Yeah, I
on
think
every.
1590 and, you know,
And
the work
while
on with
voters vote no consistently, the county votes yes consistently, so it continues this giant and
For
divide.
Berrien.
And we're to go out
Any
for
of these
something,
we've
they're
been
like,
looking
we're
at, and we're just saying, like, a cliff that we're not touching.
yes, you are, but it has nothing to do, you know, it's parks and open space, like the tagline.
service for our city.
It's not in any
And
of my
I think
residents'
same
backyard.
Similarly, and so.
So
do
that's
think
where I
that
struggle with
each-
that. That's that.
Over the
piece,
last
right?
few years.
And
you
good
know,
things like
experience
crisis care
have
centers
happened
with our on board,
both
super
at the
happy about it.
2.5
People
minutes.
deserve
It's
it.
really interesting. to see
2.5 minutes.
To do
that the
anything.
level are not.
We're done.
not aware of SCAP and what they're doing. And
Hopefully.
So I think that concerted effort should really, as a united front, to be requesting even one-time funding, like at earmarks with Murray's office or other places. Somebody would potentially get some traction. And so, our started with $1 million investment. on the state. Maybe they could match, our
I always want to read.
contributions or something like that, at least as
Another one.
Needs to do it as a united. We did the application on behalf of the staff.
Inclusionary zoning fee. Yeah, I've learned that in the last 2 years, I can't spell the word boo. So I just put the 3 vowels together and I call it good. Yeah.
Because of, the awareness.
Some
of
structural things that are in there.
So these were the strong support ones that we got you at the end.
That would be interesting.
And
That
just some details on the back.
these other sources are gonna. I
Yes.
think many cities.
So
I. bring them.
There's only a couple cities here.
Yeah.
So I did the.
What is it?
Curious to see if that's.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and the answer might be yes, no, it's a good question now, it could be that they are.
Every year.
Every day.
Yeah, I don't manage. Honestly, when I look at all the things, she's like, as a city, it's like, wow, we're struggling to like get.
She'll come over.
Yeah, pieces. To ask for like general live,
So she graduated.
thanks, like, there's still.
But
Just the
yeah,
basic
I mean, I
stuff
do think,
that
again,
is met. And with like a community that already is, I don't want to say struggling, but like. To add on one time. That it just, it will create the. what is happening.
The coaching doesn't pay all that.
That is time.
It's two strategies.
That is time.
Get us close to creating more problems.
All right. So let's come back to the big group.
And then I'll make sure that.
I want to take just,
I'll share that.
I want to take
Thanks, Eric.
1 minute to hear what this work plan item means to you. And I'm going to time it so I can get you out of here right on time. But what does this work plan item mean to you? Does this mean like identifying new funding sources and us going out and getting it? Or are you satisfied with the 1590 collection? I mean, maybe I'm missing something else. What does this item mean to you? Yes.
Go on behalf of the group, just to get the conversation started. We identified 2 possible additional funding sources that might not be, we're not currently, at least I don't think, utilizing. One is philanthropic opportunities. I think everyone in this group agrees that going for like philanthropic opportunities and really creating a greater communication strategies in order to get those partnerships would be good for this group and future funding, long-term funding. And then the other one was partnering together to seek funding from our state and federal electeds as other funding opportunities. We all kind of talked about how hard it is to all just do bare minimum at our city level, and some of these other taxing options would not be good for our community or would further create more problems that have led us here in terms of lack of affordable housing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And just so folks know too, I'll have the notes I have the notes from each of your groups. So even if you're not sharing out now, I'll hear that information. And that's very helpful to hear from your group. Those two sources are really important. We can talk more about those items and anything else that I'm seeing in the notes. We'll bring this back for further conversation, just so you know, this is just that starting point. And with that, I have Dorsal to provide an update. We have slides here. Jason, if you could show us, thank you so much, on our advisory board recruitment drive.
I promise to be really quick, so we all get stuck in rush hour traffic. Thank you all for being here, and I'll just skip right into it. So I just briefly wanted to provide you all a quick update on the advisory board. Right now, we only have 10 out of a potential 12 to 15 members. We do have 10 very active members, so I do just wanted to give you a chance to see their names here. You'll see that we have 5 members that are currently representing organizations on the advisory board, and we have 5 that are representing the community as individuals. Of the advisory board, the majority of them will be at their halfway point, the 2 out of 4 years term in November. The reason we're coming to you today is because we do only have 10 members. And so our hope is to start a recruitment drive on the next week on Monday, the 19th. We would be going through the 19th for priority review through September 1st for applicants. And here briefly is just a brief summation of what the ILA says. Appointments are for 4 years. We are supposed to have 12 to 15 members, and we are looking for people with knowledge about affordable housing and understanding of affordable housing and a desire to further affordable housing in South Kern County. To help with the recruitment process, we did identify categories of knowledge of the advisory board. We used the current advisory board as kind of a basis for that. You'll see that we have a really strong representation when it comes to nonprofit homeless service providers and regional housing organizations. One of the areas that we are really deficit in kind of knowledge base is in development, both nonprofit and for-profit development, financial information, and people with lived experience, the actual customer base that's making up the people that are utilizing the housing that you all are building. And so our hope today is to just quickly put out that ask. We will have materials that we'll send out next week, but our real hope is to ask everyone, especially here at the board, to help get the word out that we'll be doing the recruitment process. Our hope is to really just increase the full 15th amount and increase the knowledge there. Thanks for the opportunity. Sorry if I was too quick. I'm happy to answer questions.
Sorry, it's too quick. Well done, well done.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Dorsal. So
Oh, go ahead.
that brings us to any announcements. I have one. I will be on vacation August 21st through September through Labor Day. So it's 2 weeks. And it is during the application period, but I will have I will have a coverage plan in place, but just wanted to let the board know that.
Any comments for the good of the order? Y'all are rock stars. Look how much
Great to see everyone in person.
Yeah.
it is. Look how much we got accomplished today. Thank you all for your dedication to this. I know Friday afternoons, we've all agreed, are not necessarily the best, but I think we rocked it today. So thank you very much. And thanks for those who joined in the audience. And Eric, thanks for joining us online. And we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And then your spot.
Oh, have a good weekend.
Oh, yes.